Well, hello there, online class students. This is now completely dry. Well, I'm hoping it's completely dry. It's been some time now since I inked in the lines from what we did in the last episode, last lesson. So what you want in terms of materials today, this week, is I have flake white. You could use a fast drying alkyd like I used to use in the past, but I'm just using flake white. If you only have titanium white, you can use titanium white. It's okay. I like to use the flake white again because it's a lead-based white, and working with a lead-based white I think is just preferred for me, especially for portraiture, just because again it tends to be more archival. Lead tends to be more archival. Its tinting strength isn't as high, so I can do more subtle things with it. And over here on the opposite end of the spectrum, I have raw umber from Winsor Newton, which I still have to upgrade to another brand. But in any case, you're going to need some kind of white, whether it be titanium or flake, it's okay. Raw umber. And you're going to need a solvent. So I have to the left turpentine. Okay, if you're using water cleanable, water mixable, you can use water for this stage, but be advised, if you're using water mixable, check on a spot, and I'll show you how to do that. You want to be very cautious at this point. We're going to be covering the darks, and this is the start of the underpainting. So I'm putting the brush into a little bit of the turpentine, just a tiny bit of turpentine, and I'm going to get some of the raw umber. And you want the paint to be pretty thin. Now I'm going to talk about fat over lean and how this doesn't violate fat over lean. This is what you want to do first. So if you're using the water cleanable, water mixables, double check this, because there could be a chance that your lines aren't dry, because again, Cobra takes a long time to dry, which is why I recommend mixing part of it with fast drying alkyd. So let's go ahead now and continue with the lesson. So we're going to be starting the underpainting today, this week, and there's going to be a lot of emphasis on the fat over lean principle, fat over lean, when it comes to layering oil paintings. And hopefully you're using the panel that I recommended, this panel, the Ampersand Gesso Board Museum Series. This is just a dry, let's use another. This is just a dry bristle brush, so I'm going to use it to subtract a little bit. So I'm hoping that you're using the same panel that I recommended everyone. Simply because it's a really wonderful experience to build an oil painting using a high quality panel such as this one. And again, it wasn't that expensive. It can be more expensive if you buy the cradled one, or the ones with the the backing here. Mine is just flat, just because it'll be framed and it won't need the back. But in any case, what you want to do is thin out the paint with the turpentine, and just kind of like in like a stain. We're covering the dark of the background. We're relying heavily on the outlines. So let me take a little bit more. Heavily on the outlines, because the difference between Project 2 and Project 1. In Project 1, it was more bravura. It was more direct. Jumping right in. This is not. This is indirect. This is aimed towards a more refined finish, and you want to always think about. You always want to think about the next stage. What can I do today to make tomorrow or the next day that I paint on, work on whatever I'm working on, better? And you always want to think that way, because you're dedicated to painting. You're dedicated to your artwork. I know you are. So again, this is not really, it's nothing new. This is a technique that's been used for centuries. But the important thing is to take note of the materials and how to best use the materials. So I'm using turpentine just because it has, again, a better relationship with oil paint. If you're using water mixables, water is just fine. Just make sure, again, that your outlines don't accidentally disappear. And oh, by the way, if the outlines disappear, when you do this with water mixables, it is not the end of the day, because hopefully you saved one of your transfers. Remember, I told you last time to save one of your transfers. And you want to make sure that you don't accidentally introduce any oils, any walnut oil, linseed oil, anything other than what's already in your paints. And this is why it's important to have higher quality paints, especially for, this is why I don't like my Winsor Newton raw umber, because it has safflower oil in it. It has, other than the oiliness of Winsor Newton compared to, say, Old Holland, you want there to be little to no medium in this stage, little to no oil. And what the turpentine is doing is just spreading the paint particles around, which is what I want. Right now I'm just moving that up there, so let me show you what I'm doing. You want to cover all the way to the top. You want to think about this already being something that you're ordering a frame, a custom frame for. So cover all the way to the top. And if you don't want to use turpentine, I understand. You can use Gamsol for this. Petroleum distillates. The best thing would probably be spike lavender, but I'm running really low on spike lavender, so I only use it when absolutely necessary, mainly for my drawing mixtures and stuff. But if you do have spike lavender, it would be better to use. And of course, it's said to be not toxic to breathe in. So if you're worried about the toxicity, spike lavender is the better choice for you. You want the tone to be really smooth. So I missed this before. So I'm going to go ahead and draw this in just as a simple mass where her arm is. And when you're working in this way, it shouldn't take more than, say, a day for this to dry, to be workable, especially if you're painting thin like this. So everything that's going to be dark, everything that's going to be in shadow, you want to cover it now with the raw umber. Alright, so now that we have covered the darks, now what you want to do, since with project 1, so with the last project, we went in and covered everything with a flat value. I think this time we're going to go a little bit beyond that in the first part of the underpainting. The underpainting is going to have 2 different parts to it. It may have more than 2 different parts, but first and foremost, we're going to use values now to draw in forms and start to begin to explore the drawing in terms of more specificity in the lights with a less, not a broad value spectrum. So we're going to have very few values, but more than just the 2 that we had last time. So let's go ahead and just get started with that. I'm going to change to a smaller brush. So using synthetic brushes for this, pretty much for everything. So let's start off with what's probably the most obvious. Highlight. And you can use straight white for the highlight at this point because it's easier to glaze over top of something really light. So that is, it's easier to layer over something that's really light. And you want to warm up somewhere, so I'm starting off with the forehead right now. So now I'm starting to introduce a change in value. Now this is what the spike lavender is for. So now once the paint starts to get a little bit hard to move, I will transition into spike lavender, but at the moment I don't think it's a problem. If I didn't have the spike lavender, I would just use the turpentine. So we're all about second chances, third chances, fourth chances, as many chances as we need to make the best image we possibly can. So the underpainting, starting the underpainting in this way, it gives you yet another chance to correct any drawing mistakes. So if by any chance anything needs to be moved, if I mention that something needs to be adjusted or moved in the virtual classroom, this is where you can change things by simply moving a line. Instead of moving a whole bunch of values, you just move a line. And you want to compress the value range. And go for what's the most obvious. So for me, it's the most obvious to go right into these areas. Don't make this any more difficult than it already is. If you see something that you think you can adjust, or you can start to describe, because what we're doing is describing values, we're describing forms. Again, this is taking knowledge, or the assumption of knowledge from project 1. But if you're new to this, if you're new to the class, and you haven't done project 1, that's okay. I will be explaining every step of the way, so don't worry. And if you have any questions about the materials, or any questions about what's going on in project 2, or any of the projects, or any of the extracurriculars, feel free to contact me on the Patreon Messenger. I'm checking that messenger like a hawk. I'm constantly checking that messenger. And you don't want to paint really thick. it is the polar opposite. This is the polar opposite, basically, to alla prima bravura style painting. This can lead you up to that kind of painting. If you want to paint more like Sargent, if you want to paint more like Sorolla, Zorn artists like that, take a look at how they were trained. Take a look at how they were trained. So, for instance, Sargent, where was he trained? Who were his teachers? He went to École de Beaux-Arts, if I can even pronounce it properly. I probably can't. He went to a very, very classical atelier style program. He did cast drawings. He did very, very finished drawings. He did underpaintings, transfer. Well, I don't know if he did transfers, but I'm sure he did something along those lines, because, again, this type of technique has been known for centuries. It's only recently, unfortunately, that it was lost in the past century. But in any case, this can lead you up towards the more bravura type alla prima approach, and you can always make the painting look more expressive and free and stuff later, once you figure out, like, suppose there's only 100 brush strokes. Of course, that's just a example. Once I know where all those 100 brush strokes go, I can go and adjust the direction, the style, anything I want, once I have this foundation down. So when you're creating an underpainting using lead white, you can usually, excuse me, I prefer it just because I can, see that? I can be very transparent with it. Paint very transparent. So you want to explore around the forms. And make sure that those outlines are still evident after this layer. We'll cover them up, but we need them at this point. So when in doubt, unify. So I just decided to just unify that. Yeah, and you can actually make the sclera lighter than need be in this layer. Maybe not as light as the highlight on the forehead, but you can make it lighter. And make sure to give yourself breaks. So for instance, right now I'm about to take a break. Every 20 minutes or so I usually take a break. It's very much part of the process. You must be able to separate yourself from your image. Because if you look into your image too much, you will start to miss things. Because of the tendency that we all have to hyperfocus and then miss the big picture. So you want to see the whole and the parts at the same time. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and take a break. And I'm back. So now, now that I've come back to the painting, I'm a little concerned about a proportional thing. So I'm going to quickly double check this. Hairline to eyebrow. Oh, I guess not. If you're using the same reference, again, you can use any of the approved photo references. Doesn't have to be this one, but Barbara pretty much follows the ideal canon of proportions. Eyebrows to forehead should be equal. So, yep. I just thought that maybe I had painted this wrong. So it's important to check the outlines. So let's just continue to describe, shall we? So a little darker over here. Now we're going to start to get more specific faster with pretty much each one of these projects. As our paintings will become more and more realistic. Now, Project 2 deliberately it was intended to push you to experiment with your materials, with oil painting. Project 1 was intended to push you to, draw with color, with oil paint that is, and get a feel for the material. Now, we are taking it much, much more cautiously. So it's not going to be as patchy as Project 1. Instead, it's going to be more dimensional from the beginning. At a certain point, I'll switch us to close-up. I'm really trying to describe the eye socket shape. And again, if you paint transparent, like what we're doing here, it will help to compress the value range. You want to give yourself a chance to get things wrong. And that happens. That's just part of the process. And I'm going to be using the tone whenever possible. So for instance there, I'll probably just leave the tone. So now the next most obvious thing is the side of the cheekbone. Compared to last time we were very cautious with this. We're just going to basically follow through one whole little curve at a time, not as cautiously as the last time. Now, the outline for the side of the face, the shadow, was an approximation, but it is something that I actually want to paint opaque. So this is the most opaque area in the underpainting. I'm going to now zoom you in here so you can see. Again, the photo references were given to you in a previous post where you can download them. So see how I'm trying to cover up the line? And the reason you want to cover that line up is because the delicate nature of the shadow shape on the side of Barbara's face. And I recommend a really soft brush for that. That's why I switched brushes. And yes, the line will show through still, but we'll be able to adjust that next time. So we're really starting to build the volume through the darks, the usage of the darks. And we're going to leave the lights a little more flat. So each stage, each part of this is pretty important. Even the tone, the color of the tone that we had before is important. We leave nothing to chance here. And you want to think of this more as a drawing. you're still drawing, not really coloring anything in or rendering anything yet. So far, I haven't had to thin out the paint at all. Might as well get the, excuse me, the forehead while we're at it. This lighting is much more difficult than the lighting from the images on Project 1. In that the shadows are much more subtle. And make sure to keep your edges soft. See, I'm trying to cover up the edge there. Now this is going to be light years more dimensional once we complete this than my previous YouTube videos featuring the same model, Barbara. Solely because of the knowledge and technique that's going into this. Now you may be wondering, why did we put that tone in at all if we're going right over it in the shadow? And the reason I chose to put in that tone first before anything was to make our lives easier. It didn't really take much thinking to cover, a flat surface with the tone. So that should help to push the lights without having to do much work. You always want to look for an economy of means. So I guess it's along the lines of work smarter, not harder. Again, be careful not to paint too thick. So if you have a fan brush, I hope I put that in the materials list. Go over the entire thing with a fan brush once in a while. And remember to dry clean the fan brush. Meaning just rub it onto dry paper towel. Or a rag, whichever. So right now I'm just going in, drawing, and describing. You want to make sure to not make anything in the light become confused with anything in the shadow. Meaning, you don't want any of the values in the light to be as dark as any of the values in the shadow. You can start off that way. I started off that way. And now I'm just adjusting that tone till I get the value that I want. Remember to keep the lights relatively flat, so I'm not going to put too many more value transitions into the light. So you want to be very aware of the planes as you paint them in. So for instance, this is the side of the I usually don't say this in my head, but it's the corner of the lip, right, resting on the corner of the orbicularis oris. Usually I just identify a shape in my head. I just see it and then I paint it in. Again, looking for what is the most obvious at that moment. Before too long, we're going to flatten out the lights. And again, a lead-based white is ideal, but you can use titanium. make it a little darker up here. So hopefully you see that, you know, not putting in too many values in the lights, excuse me, actually helps to keep everything unified. Just want to make sure that you can still see your outlines. And the only place that I don't want the outlines to be as evident by the time the painting is complete is right there. Alright, now I'm just going to take another break. Remember to take breaks at least every 20 minutes or so. Let's take a break. And I'm back. So again, just looking for the most obvious things to adjust. So this was the most obvious to me. And at this point it does help to have a light brush and a dark brush. Now the objective of this lesson again is to push the drawing further. Also be mindful of your edges. The softer you can make the edges, the better. You can always sharpen edges later more easily than you can make them softer. That's just the way the material works. And if you're following along with a different material, such as acrylic, if you're following along with acrylic, then it's the same principle that you want to have softer edges. It's just that due to the fast drying nature of acrylic, you have a little more freedom. Now you see the beauty of the flake white, how you know how it spreads onto the panel without tinting too much. This is another area, though not as delicate as up here, this is another area that I want to start to eliminate that outline and turn it into a transitioning plane. And I think what was making me think that the hairline was too far up was this light. I'm gonna just cover this. Remaining true to the outline, I just want to cover this dark. And we'll probably put another tint of dark into the background before the lesson is up. So here's where the edges can get too sharp. So what you want to do is, while both sides are still wet, meaning this side, just run a dry brush, a soft dry brush through them a couple times, just to ensure nothing dries too sharp. Now if you're using titanium white, just be careful not to lose any of the outlines. And now you can start to build the impasto. So I don't want it to be too highly rendered at this stage. So now I'm just going to go into the shirt a little bit and then darken the background once more. And then we're going to call it. Now I'm actually putting a little bit of the turpentine. I was going to use the spike lavender, but I don't think so. If you have the spike lavender and you feel like you need to thin out the paint a little bit for the face, definitely use it. But just remember not to use any mediums yet. No linseed oil, no walnut oil, not yet. I'll try to describe this corner, and then of course leave the light a little bit more flat, meaning this little section over here. Now let's go ahead and start to put in another layer of dark onto the background. Same deal, a little bit of turpentine or solvent. Start from the back corner. Whatever you do, don't cover this. Don't cover into anything that you have already painted on. So let's, or anything that you've placed the titanium, or sorry, the flake white or titanium white, whichever that you decide to use. Leave a little bit here for the light of the hair. Now again, if you're doing this with Cobra, with the water mixables, I would highly suggest to give this at least a week. I'd say 7 to 14, no, that's 2 weeks, 7 to 8 days. If you're using traditional, it'll probably be ready within 24 or 36 hours. And of course with Cobra, as mentioned before, there's a way to mix a little bit of a fast drying alkyd oil paints into your Cobra to help with the drying time. Probably still won't be as quick drying as traditional, but it would help a little bit. Again, I'm going to leave some of the light there for the hair. And this part's up to you, but I usually like to leave some brush marks in the background, because when you layer over top of this, you can do the same thing with your paint, with the color, and then you can see kind of the beautiful layering of the colors and the brush strokes. So pretty much every aspect of the picture has been put into consideration. Even this little plane here where the pillow is going to sit. I will just cover this little corner and we should be done. Alright, so remember, if you're using traditional oil paints, in particular the Williamsburg and Old Holland, or even Winsor Newton, since this is Winsor Newton, this should be dry. If you're using the traditionals, they should be ready to rework 24 to 36 hours, depending on how thick you painted the lights. If you painted it really thick, it will take much longer. Hopefully you're working on the same type of panel, so if you're working on a smoother surface, then it takes less time to dry. A rougher surface, it tends to take a little bit longer. If you have a fan brush, just go across the surface of the light. Remember to dry clean the fan brush. Make sure that the fan brush is very soft. You don't have to do this. It's just to try to reduce any kind of sharp edges or excessive buildup of paint. And when this dries, it will sink in. Don't be frightened by the paint sinking in. It's okay. You know, it will start to sink in. Let's adjust the light so you can actually see the texture. That should be a little better, so you can see the brush strokes and the surface quality that we have. And again, if you're using water cleanable or water mixable, give it, I'd say, a week to a week and a half. Next time we'll come in and continue to describe the forms of the face, and then start to cover more of the value range. Again, everything is compressed because we worked more transparent and not transparent, less thick is what I'm trying to say. So again, the goal is you want this to be completely dry, or as dry as it can be for the next layer. That being said, thank you so much for all of your support on my Patreon. It really helps me out so much, and in particular, I really look forward to seeing all of your artwork, especially in the virtual classroom. I'm filming this in the past, I guess, relative to when this video is going to come out. So for the projects, I'm actually filming ahead of time. So I think this one is supposed to come out, I think, in 3 weeks from the time that I'm filming it. So just remember, you can always contact me on Patreon just using the messenger if you have any questions on the materials or anything regarding the projects or the extracurriculars. Alright, take care, and I'll see you on the next one.